So, greetings to everybody in this session, whether they're here in the hall with us or enjoy joining us online. And I think we all know that we are living in a world where there are many challenges for us to be talking about and to be concerned about. And whilst there are many, many of them, they do group, don't they, around a few big themes. We know that we have some major environmental challenges. We know that there's the problem of inequality showing up in many ways all over the world in different ways. And of course, we're all hoping to create a more stable geopolitical scenario for us all. My name is Lucy Parker, and I'm a partner in the Brunswick Group, a proud partner of the Paris Peace Forum, and I lead the piece of the firm that actually works with clients to develop strategies for how they will deal some of these big societal problems. And that is everything from obviously responding to climate change, which is a topic of the week with COP26 just moments away from us, and also everything through to plastics and methane and everything else. And yet at the same time, socioeconomic questions at the far end of global supply chains, and even diversity in the boardroom and in the workplace. So companies are dealing with all of these things all of the time. And in context setting for today's question, there's probably two things to note about that. These are not separate challenges. We're all seeing all the time that they are intersecting, that the solution to one also needs to be the solution for another, that these things now come together. And secondly, that actually, as we start working on them together, we actually need to expect that business plays its role. Maybe in the past, that hasn't been understood to be part of the solution. But we are seeing now that we would expect businesses to be part of it. And that really means that the proposition at the heart of this question on the table today is that as businesses succeed in today's and tomorrow's world, they need to deliver financial value and social value hand in hand, in tandem. And of course, many of the leaders of businesses absolutely expect that their competence and their confidence is in delivering financial value. They've grown up with it, it's what got them their jobs. But actually, there are many fewer business leaders who have really yet turned to what it means to deliver social value. And that's what makes this question on the table today so important. And I'm joined with a wonderful group of people to actually help us answer it. I have on my left here Michel de Rosin, and he is chairman of Faurecia, one of the world's great automobile companies. And all of us can see in the world the way that industry is really moving towards the social challenges. We have joining us online Muriel Pénicaud, who is the French ambassador to the OECD, so bringing with her an enormous political capability, and also having been Minister for Labour here in France, and indeed standing for Director General for the ILO, one of the great international organizations for labour. So bringing a huge political understanding at a national and international level to this conversation, as well as her history, having worked in the private sector for a long time. And sitting with me here alongside Michel is Camille Poutoin, who I am delighted to join us on the panel today, because she heads up B4IG, Business for Inclusive Growth. I think of this as a pioneering organization on how businesses really at the forefront of this question can deliver social value. And then we also have joining us online Paulina Murphy. Paulina Murphy heads up the World Business Alliance, and that is really at the sharp edge of measuring whether businesses actually are delivering on these societal goals. So I could hardly have a better panel. Together they tell a great story. And I'm going to turn to Michael first, Michel, because there are many people, maybe even people listening to us today, who would say, how does business even have a seat at this table? Because surely in the conversation about today's big societal challenges, businesses and business leaders are the villain of the piece. And so I greet you to the panel maybe as the villain of the piece. What do you have to say for yourself as a business leader in today's world as to whether businesses can actually be a positive agent of change?
Lucy, I confess I'm a little shy to be the only guy in this panel with 4 ladies, and I'm grateful that I was accepted as a guy and as the only villain around. Having said this, I do want to make a statement. things have changed in our space, and I believe in many companies, dramatically in the few last years, in a short period. And let me explain why. One first reason is pressure from customers. We, my company, Faurecia, we sell equipment to car manufacturers. We sell seats, we sell cockpits, we sell all kinds of pieces. And they sell cars to individuals. Well, individuals in recent years have changed their behavior, and now when they buy a car, they say, I want to know if this car is good or bad for the environment. And so our customers, the Volkswagen and General Motors of this world, are telling us, we want you to sell us equipment that are good for the environment. And we don't just want words, we want proofs. How do you make them? What do you do to make them environment friendly? So that's one big change, one big pressure. The pressure from our customers because of the pressure they get from their customers. The second pressure is from employees. The new generations, when they choose a job, they not only look at the job, the salary, the perks, it's the promotions, blah, blah, blah. They also want to know, is this a company that respects social objectives and delivers social value? That's new, but it's very strong. And if we are not able to prove to employees that we are good on social values, that we mean it, you know what they do? They simply don't come. They don't come, we can't hire them.
And that's your experience.
That is our real experience. So that's the second pressure, the pressure from employees. The third pressure is from regulators. Regulators being either national regulators or international regulators. In our case, the European Commission and the European Council of Ministers has been quite proactive in imposing new regulations so that companies whose cars are not environment friendly have to pay very large fines. And money talks. That kind of pressure is well heard. So that is the third pressure from regulators. And maybe surprisingly for some of you here today, there is pressure from capitalists. Shareholders like the Wellington and other financial firms, they not only judge us on our financial performance, they now also judge us on our social performance. In fact, the largest of these financial firms have created special teams who are very competent, very shrewd, and who observe, analyze our social performance. And they listen to everything we say, and they don't just want words, they want figures, they want proofs that what we do is real. So, 4 pressures. In that context, we have no choice. We have to comply. That's not exactly true. When I say we have to comply, we have 2 ways. Either we are a pioneer or we are a follower. We have decided at Faurecia to be a pioneer. And I can tell you, it takes a lot of work, a lot of energy, but we believe we must do it. And so we're doing it.
And so one of the questions that's run through, I think, the whole of the Paris Peace Forum when the private sector comes up is, yes, but isn't it just greenwash? Isn't it just they're saying these things? From what you're saying, we would extrapolate that actually it is on the boardroom agenda. It is actually being taken seriously by leadership. Would you claim that?
Please, if I have only one message, it is that you should believe, you must believe, yes, this is not communications anymore. This is not asking Brunswick, please Brunswick, help us build a great speech. We are changing the way we do business. And to give you just one example, we have 300 plants around the world. We have given each of the 300 plants yearly objectives on how to reduce CO2 production with the goal to reach one day, us as a corporation, 0 CO2 emission. And In a few words, it sounds simple. It's not simple at all. It's a lot of work. So now, in the budgets we have, the corporate budget, the board budget, the plant budget, you have financial goals, and you have also green goals.
Yeah.
That's very new.
That is very new, and certainly, I mean, you were mentioning Brunswick, and for us, the entire point is what is the company actually doing? Muriel, could I bring you in at this point and say, you have worked in the private sector, but really today you're bringing us a very powerful public sector perspective nationally and internationally. And how would you really want businesses to act on this agenda? What do you think we can and should be expecting businesses to do to deliver social value?
I think the first thing is that businesses today accept very, very much more than before. They are operating in an environment which are the mega trends which are very important for them to take into account. The first one is clearly the consequences of pandemic. It has increased dramatically the inequalities between developing and developed countries, between genders, between generation. And for that, it's a first challenge for a company. But the climate change, the climate transition, the digitalization, and the demographic trends will change totally the world of work in the coming 10 years. The expectation is 1 out of 2 jobs will be dramatically different in 10 years from now. Either they will be destroyed or created or transformed. At the end, the net of jobs will be bigger and there will be tension on recruitment. But today, the question of company is how they protect natural resources, they will need them long term, and how they develop the human competencies that they will need long term. So on the long term, I think the alignment of the need of the community, of the society at large, and the needs of company are the same. And some pioneers have understood that as we should say that in investment funds or in some company, some already do that, understand their to be responsible of their supply chain, to be responsible of health and safety, to have a strong social dialogue about sharing value. It's a long-term investment that makes sense for the community sense, I would say, the social justice, but also from a perspective of having a sustainable business. And that's a new shift of now, how companies join the club that because they are obliged or because they believe it or because they have measured that it makes sense. The club of the company that know that investing on CO2 reduction, on developing skills, on sharing value, on protecting the health of their workers through social dialogue is the lever for their sustainable growth.
It's an interesting question how businesses step up to the societal, the socioeconomic challenges, because we were hearing Michel talk really about the environmental push, and there are many ways that are clearer of measuring progress on the environmental side. But on the societal side, I know you have done a huge amount on skills yourself and on indeed equality of various forms. What do you think we should be expecting companies to do on those practical ways of moving forward?
I can give you 2 examples where you can see that the challenges of the company, challenges of the society at large are very related. The first one is health and safety. Today, 4 billion people in the world, 4 billion humans don't have access to social protection. And company can do a lot on that because 60% of the work in the world is made in informal economy, meaning including for global companies, the question of the value chain responsibility is very high. When I was executive VP of HR in Danone, we launched and implemented what we call Dan Cares, was the first social protection ever for 100,000 employees everywhere in the world. And in many countries, it was the first time that workers and their family could get access to healthcare. Today, because of the pandemic, we know that not only economy is global, but health too. So the interest of everyone from a human perspective and from an economic perspective, and to get access to social protection. We were pioneering on that. Now there's 300 large companies doing it. But we have made laws, and there are projects of directive at European level, and very recently at the ILO, International Labour Organization, there were an agreement to go in this direction. When I was chairing the G7 Social, we made an agreement with social partners at the global level, and ILO and IMF and OECD and the G7 countries to go in this direction. And Antonio Guterres recently said it should be one of the outputs of the crisis, of the COVID crisis. So on this topic, you see that company can do, governments can do, social partners can do, but nobody can do really well if we don't work together. And these alliances, this cooperation, this partnering between private and public will be key. It will be key for climate challenges, CO2 reduction. It will be key for gender equality, and it will be key for health and safety. So it's examples, and there are others. But I mean, it's a time where we really need to cooperate, unions and business and governments and NGOs and society at large. It's a time to do it. We don't have so much time from a climate perspective, but also from a social perspective, because the inequalities are so much growing that it could really create a huge shift in the cohesion and even the democracy acceptation. So we need to act quick, to act together. And it's possible, many examples already.
Yes. And so that's a perfect cue, isn't it, for yourself, Camille? Because actually the work you're doing is all about doing it together. And my experience is that a lot of the real pushes into new practice are coming from alliances that are choosing to be proactive, choosing to show what's possible. So B4IG is pretty new on the scene. It's a pretty young organization. So perhaps the first thing I should be asking you is, what is it and what are you trying to do?
This is exactly what Muriel just said. We decided to partner with governments, with stakeholders, to fight against inequality, to promote more inclusive business models. So B4IG was launched 2 years ago. It's a young coalition, as you just said. It was created in connection with the G7 summit in Paris, and it's co-chaired by the OECD, Secretary General of the OECD, and the CEO, currently Emmanuel Faber, as former CEO of Danone. And the objective of the coalition is to take action. We, of course, at the base, at the very beginning, there was a pledge signed up by all CEOs of the coalition. But the objective is to take action, to take collective action, because it's not easy. It will take time, but it's complex. And we will have more impact if we work together. The coalition gathers 35 pioneering companies. And if we work with governments, if we work with trade unions. The areas of the pledge covers the key areas of inclusive growth, human rights, supply chains, diversity and inclusion, and last but not least, impact measurement. This is something we are going to discuss a lot because, of course, we want to walk the talk, and you can't manage something that you can't measure. But the coalition, to answer your question, was created to take collective action. Each of the 35 member companies, nearly 40 soon, each of the 35 member companies, well, is a pioneer in one area. They have an impact, but they are aware that they would have more impact if they worked collectively, if they support each other, if they if they equip each other with guidelines, etc., if they show that it is possible to make progress.
It's a very interesting point, show that it's possible. And I know when you and I have spoken before, it strikes me that the pioneer companies are showing that something new is possible. So I think we all understand the theme is really emerging. We have to do it together. But if you were to just look for a moment at what the individual companies are actually doing, can you give an example of what good practice looks like in a company to actually show what they can do? What are they making possible?
The coalition is young, but she has already made some major achievements, and we are working hard, in fact, with a lot of motivation, sincerity, and it's great. I will take one example, living wage. Living wage is not an easy topic.
Yeah.
And when we talk about social issues, we often talk about training, about diversity and inclusion, which are, of course, major issues. But it's very, very complicated to move forward on living wage. First, we decided collectively to put living wage as a corporate priority. A strong statement adopted by the board meeting last June on living wage. Second, it's complex, it takes time, and when you want to apply living wage policies in your own organization, along your supply chains, you ask several questions. How do I calculate living wage? How do I embark my suppliers, etc.? So we want to equip companies with guidelines, tools, etc., recommendations to implement living wage policies, first within the coalitions and beyond. And showing that it's possible is key. The living wage work stream within the coalition is led by two pioneering companies, Unilever and L'Oréal, who made very ambitious commitments on the topic, as you know. And the objective is not to be alone, to create an ecosystem around living wage. So statement, we put living wage, we consider that living wage is a key priority for business. And second, we equip other companies, we equip ourselves, and we equip other companies with what they need to implement such a policy.
And it's a journey, isn't it? I mean, listening to each of you who've already spoken, it's not easy, and it has to be a priority, and it has to result in action. And I noticed you used the word, Muriel, a moment ago, the business model. And I've certainly seen and worked with so many companies who are we're doing this good thing, we're doing that good thing. It's not until it shows up in the business model, and living wage is a very good example of it, that it starts to really bite. And Paulina, that really gives a perfect cue, I think, to what you're doing in your organization, because you are measuring. And as we were just hearing from Camille a moment ago, it doesn't happen if it doesn't get measured. So how does that actually work? People are very mistrustful still of social measures of various kinds. So what's your wisdom and experience on how we can measure these things like social contribution?
Thank you so much, Lucy. And it's absolutely clear, just from listening to all the other panelists, that companies are without doubt agents of change. And I was in person at the Paris Peace Forum for the last few days, and I heard global leaders also talked about the interconnectedness of our economies. And of course, this has been one of the characteristics of the SDGs. It's impossible to focus on one without having an impact on another. And the pandemic has reinforced that point, that our lives are shaped by the deep interconnectedness of people, governments, the environment, and critically companies. So it's reinforced more than ever that the private sector is a critical delivery partner in all of this and all the issues that we've discussed. There's lots of business activity and commitments, and we definitely need to welcome the progress that we've seen with the private sector and finance taking so many solutions forward within COP26 in the last few weeks. But of course, the political agenda at COP26 and the SDGs, which we look at in how we measure companies, it doesn't easily lend it to the business-led systemic transformation. There is no specific actions that were spelled out by the governments, and it's really been left up to business to sort out how to be that effective agent of change in these big issues of our time.
When I've heard you describe how it actually works for you in the Alliance, one of the things I thought was fascinating was your index, the feeling that you're actually tapping into one of the most important drivers of business, which is a natural competitiveness, that you're actually marking one business, indeed one sector, against another. Can you explain why you feel that this thing of indexing is one of the biggest levers for change?
Sure. So at the World Benchmarking Alliance, we've been working on that translation piece, and I think that's why I went to the political agenda to give that context. so we want to try to help companies address how they can step into the a responsible leadership agenda that the governments are asking them to do. And so through consultation with broad groups of stakeholders, we produce system-based methodologies, which we then use to assess the companies on our list. And the methodology can then be used by the companies themselves to identify the priorities for action. And the benchmark then provides the information for stakeholders that can be put to use in dialogue between the stakeholders and the companies, so that everybody is really focused on the issues that have been identified in the benchmark that are the priorities for change. And so we can generate a more inclusive dialogue between investors and boards, but then also NGOs and the companies. And this type of action is critical if we want the boards and the C-suite to move to actively consider sustainable outcomes, and for the non-financial data to be brought to the same level of importance and valued at the same level as financial data.
Yes, that's fascinating. The first question that we've had come in on this subject is actually directly on it. And having heard all the speakers, I would just love to reiterate that everybody who wants to ask a question, please do feel free, and it will come through to me, and we'll share it. I think the question that has come in on exactly this subject gets thrown to Michel very directly, and then we can all take him to task if we feel that he hasn't answered in the way we would like. Because the question is picking up exactly what you're saying, which is, if you're looking at how it actually goes to the organisation's board of directors, if you're really going to be serious about what you're saying, Paulina, that there are social measures making their way through to an equal priority of financial measures, how does that actually happen at board level? What do you have to do?
The first thing is that nothing really happens if the board...
You need to speak into your mic.
My mic, I'm sorry. I apologize. So I was saying, nothing serious happens on these matters if the top is not engaged. And the top is both the board and the CEO. Mm-hmm. You need both. First of all, you need the CEO to be the leader. The CEO cannot be a servant of the board. Okay? So you want the CEO to be convinced that this is good for the company, good for the customers, good for the future. And then, of course, the board must be aligned with that. And it's not such a difficult task for a group of men and women who compose the board to see if the CEO is real or if this is a masquerade. It's not difficult. You listen, you spend time with the CEO, you spend time with the executive team, and of course, you have committee work where you have extensive and detailed reports on what the strategy is, what the action plans are, how results are being measured, back to the point that was made. Many companies would cheat if there was no good supervision. Just like our financial performance is audited by auditors, as you know, there are more and more firms who now audit the social performance of corporations. By the way, they compete with one another. Some of these firms are very good, some are a bit lax, so it is very important to choose one of the rigorous ones. And they have a reputation. You can easily know who is good, who is great, and who is more lax. So I would say, in summary, my answer to your question is, number one, make sure your CEO is committed to this, and that this is not something he does just because of duty, but because he is, in his heart, convinced. Number two, make sure the board is unanimously also aligned. And then number three, work on it. Look at the figures, look at the facts, visit the plants, visit the R&D centers, meet the customers to make sure that this is not just great propaganda, but great reality.
And you're saying, make sure they're committed. Could you take the question up a level and say what will commit them?
So, a few minutes ago, I told you why we are changing. I'd like to say a word of how we're changing, what we are doing differently. a key effort is communication. We face resistance, but we also face skepticism. Some people say, are you sure? Are you serious? Are you just saying this to us because you have to? But can we just go back to normal business the way we've done it forever?
We know you have to say it in public, but really are
Exactly.
you doing it?
What, you know? Look, I'll tell you an anecdote, as you are British. Many years ago, I was in the chemical industry, and one of my ferocious competitors was ICI. ICI. And I remember my peer at ICI telling me, we are not allowed to do cartel, but I will do it. I know if I get caught, they will fire me, but if I don't get caught, I will continue doing it, okay? This is not what we are talking about here, okay? So we need to communicate, and we communicate internally and externally to convince the skeptics, and there are many, that we mean this. The second thing is we remunerate in every manager's bonus and LTI, equity programs, we include indicators of social performance. As an example, at Faurecia, we've had for the past years an indicator on the growth of the percentage of women in upper positions. Year after year, that proportion is growing. And it's not easy because we hire mostly managers from engineering schools where there are many more guys than ladies. So it takes efforts. We have to kidnap ladies from other companies or attract ladies with a better pay or things like that. Okay.
So that it's in the detail of pushing it through.
It must be part of day-to-day management.
And Camille, it makes me want to turn to you, because when you hear the sort of firmness with which that action is driven, you are talking about what I think of as activist leaders. They're people pushing it, like you are an active-oriented coalition. But there are still relatively few of these in the corporate arena. So what can a coalition like yours do to get it more mainstream, to make more companies see this path forward?
Before answering your question, if I may, we not only push, we help. We help other companies. We help member companies and other companies to take action. And yes, there are only 35 companies in this coalition, big companies, major corporations. But what is very important is to show that it is possible. It is possible to move forward on living wage, on ethnic diversity, even in Europe, even in France, for example. It is possible to move forward on inclusive sourcing. I'm responsible transformation. I am mentioning several of the areas we are working on. And as I said, it's complex. It may take time, sometime. It will depend. It depends on the areas, but what is very important is being innovative and not reinventing the wheel. And I think that the role of business coalitions is sharing how it works to make your business model more inclusive. And then by doing that, you can have an impact beyond the coalition. And okay, we take the lead, but we don't want to be alone. We want to embark all the others. And this is what we are going to do, for example, what we are doing now on inclusive sourcing. We just shared the methodology we have been working on for several months. We are just sharing it, and it's open to everyone. Okay, you are a company, you want to implement an inclusive sourcing policy. Just take a look at what we are doing and what B4IG companies has decided to do.
So the sharing is part of the catalyzing, as in your experience?
Absolutely.
And do you think that if you progress that thinking, that everybody can join in and learn from one another, do you think that companies do enough? Because it's one thing to do something. Is it enough? What's going on in your experience?
Is it enough? that raises a question of measurement, and this is key. I would say that the top priority of businesses, governments, and stakeholders should be in the 2-3 years to come to align on a common framework to measure the impact of businesses on the environment and the society. I think this should be the key priorities. There are several frameworks today. We need a global framework. There are several initiatives, of course, in the EU, in the US, at the G7 level. That's great. Governments are accelerating on the topic, which is great, but we have to go fast. And this will be key.
And I was mindful of our conversation, Paulina, when we were talking about exactly this subject. Perhaps one of the biggest drags on the corporate sector is the feeling that a company may say, well, we've done better than last year, or we do better than our sector, by and large. But that is not referencing what actually needs to be done in the world. We were hearing Muriel speak earlier about what actually needs to be done. So how do you help companies, in your view, with the measurement, to think about actually whether enough is being done in terms of the scale of the task, rather than just, are they better than their immediate peer group? How are they doing?
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to also, before I'll give an example from one of our benchmarks to highlight that point, but I want the audience to know that the participation in the WBA's benchmarks is not voluntary. And that's important because we include companies regardless of their ownership structure. So we're not just looking at listed companies, we include them if they are dominant and influential players on sustainability, and they have an ability to impact change through their supply chains. And that's the only way we can get a holistic picture across the business and then everybody knows where the priority areas for action need to be. But to come back to an example, we published an oil and gas benchmark last July, so a few months ago, which included 100 companies on the road that they need to go towards the Paris Agreement. So it's the first benchmark to use a 1.5 scenario, and it's based on the IEA net zero by 2050. And we look at scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And we know it's tough, and it's not, it is that journey and the destination, but we do that on purpose so that we set out the ambition and the roadmap for the company. And then we can also see quite clearly that the results of our benchmark, the leading company scored 57%. Wow. So it's not a high score, and we know we have some way to go, but the take what you can now attitude is not good enough. And so if we only showed if we let's say showed that the best scored the best performing company at 100%, and then the rest followed, that would not show the progress, and then that would not give a clear picture to all the stakeholders around them of what needs to happen. And I really want to reiterate that this is an agenda for everybody. For example, it's the state-owned companies that are much slower at transitioning than the listed companies, in this case, in the oil and gas sector.
So actually, if you're saying the best in the sector is at 57% of the journey that the world is sort of agreeing we need to take, that suggests that there's people way, way below that, and particularly, as you say, state-owned actors maybe. So is that true across sectors? I mean, something like the oil and gas industry, of course, is absolutely in the spotlight at the moment. But would you say that that picture that you paint, that companies are doing stuff but probably not enough stuff, would that go across sectors?
Yeah, I painted quite a negative picture using the oil and gas, but so I'll use another example from our recently assessed food and agriculture companies. So this is we include 350 companies across the food and agriculture value chain, and the leading scorer is at 71%. Now I'll come back to who that was in a minute. But we look at the 45 indicators in the food and agriculture sector across environment, social governance, and nutrition pillars. So again, we try to paint the holistic picture of what those companies need to do on all of those agendas. And the leading company is Unilever, and I use this as a particular example because Unilever has been embedding sustainability from the board, from the C-suite, all the way down, and the culture is absolutely ingrained in everybody, and throughout not just the group, not just Unilever itself, but across now also the brands that make part of the group. And that's been a terrific journey that they've been on in the last few years. But it's, even that, Unilever is only getting 71%. So you can see that they also have a lot to learn. And I think it's through strong dialogue with other actors, and particularly if we can call Unilever a pioneer, and I think they can, is that they can have that important role to make sure that those actions that they're taking, the best practices that they're showing, can be rolled and mainstreamed across the rest of the food and ag value chain.
Which is very much what Camille is talking about. If you have learnt lessons, can you share them, even if you're still on the journey yourself? And this surely brings us back, Muriel, to yourself, doesn't it? Because if measurement is an enabler to action, because you could actually see what needs to happen, what is the role of government? I mean, before you were talking about what we might expect companies to do, but what can we hope that governments, whether it's at a national or an international level, can do to actually force the pace of acceleration here?
I think we have here very impressive examples of companies which are pioneers. But if you want to change of scale and speed, you need the regulation. You need the government and parliaments to take the topics and to enlarge it. We'll give you an example. When I was Minister of Labour 3 years ago, I was very happy with the support of President Macron to launch and implemented a law with an obligation of results on equal pay. Mm-hmm. Equal pay for equal job and equal career opportunities. And we said we need two things. First is to measure it, because as all said, if you don't measure, you don't progress. So it's why we created an index of equality, and now it's inspiring a project of a European directive. But that's not enough. What I mean, it's with the regulation, we go beyond what should be rational. To be honest, when you speak of gender equality, we have proofs since years by IMF, ILO, OECD, by McKinsey, by many of them, prove that investing in gender equality is not only a social justice, an equity question, but it is a lever for growth and performance. And companies with strong mixed leadership are more performing. And it's interesting because it shows that even the business is not always rational. If the business was only rational, all companies would have embraced gender equality. And it's why sometimes you need the pioneers, you need the coalition, but there's a moment where the society at large, through its governments and its parliament, say, now we understand the why socially, the why economically, and we go with change of scale and speed. And then you need regulation. And it's interesting to see that at ILO, which is the tripartite employers, unions, and workers, and governments body from the UN to make this convention with kind of an international treaty. It's not easy to agree, but when you agree, it becomes the framework for the world, for all countries and all companies. And we need these two legs. One is the initiative of companies that prove and measure that it makes sense to invest in people, to invest in social justice, to invest in climate change. It makes sense for the sustainable and inclusive business overall. But at the same time, you need the governments, the European Union, and you need the global level. And in this case, for inequalities, it's clearly the role of ILO. You need them to change the scale quicker because time is running. I started by that. I would like to emphasize again, yes. When 60% of the people are in informal work, when hundreds of people have come back to very real poverty because of the COVID, when 200 million kids are still working in our world, we cannot wait. We have to make everyone responsible. The best thing is just by natural coalition and natural decision. But I think there's a time where social partners and governments must take the responsibility to make the change quicker, larger, and deeper, and more sustainable.
It's a very interesting way you put it like that, because Michel began us by saying we're doing it because there are pressures on us to do it, and you literally enumerated 4, of course, one of which is regulation. And there's a big debate around the world about whether regulators, again, national or international, are firm enough with companies. Do you think that the regulators need to get even firmer in order to push this? Because the way you're describing it, the urgency with which you're describing it, if it's just a negotiation as to what the private sector will tolerate, it may not go fast enough. Would you have regulators go faster and harder?
I think it's exactly the question of how you handle democracy. In democracy, you need, at the same time, regulation to be ahead of the change and to follow the most advanced change maker. So it's not either. You need both. But today, I think we need to accelerate. Why? Because as mentioned, with the mega trends of climate change, of change of demography, of digitalization, and the inequalities which are growing, we cannot stay just sitting, hoping that the most pioneering company will convince the other. We need them. It's extremely important because they are not only business case but social case.
And I wonder whether,
but at the same time, we need to be firm, and because our collective responsibility is to envision the future, and the world of work is changing very fast. So if we don't embrace that, if we don't anticipate, if we don't accompany this change, we'll have more inequalities and more disorders.
and it strikes me that the public discourse around regulation and business is, oh, well, regulators are cramping the style of business, they are in the way of enterprise and so forth, if they force regulation. Can you imagine a way, or can you describe for us a way in which you could flip that over, that actually the regulatory framework can be part of the acceleration, part of the enterprise, the innovation and so forth as needed to do this? How can it be a catalyst for acceleration and positive movement rather than just a drag on historic practice?
First, we have to measure on the mid-long term, not only short term. What I mean by that, when the race to the bottom on social condition, wages or social condition of work, is a lose-lose approach on the long term. On short term, some company can be tempted to have very low wages and not invest in upskilling or reskilling despite the change which are coming, not providing social protection. It can be a temptation, but short term, you don't see large company growing with not pushing that topic much further. You don't see developing country being developed country without improving the social condition of workers. So there is a relationship on the midterm. It's exactly like climate. Climate short term, it requires a lot of investment and change for the company. It's difficult to embrace the new economic model. But on the long term, that will provide the growth of tomorrow. So you need to be a little more long-term or mid-term oriented to do that. And we have example that the regulation, even from a trade perspective of our economic competition, it is linked. Just an anecdote, when I launched the Dankers, the social protection for all in Danone, one of my colleagues, the head of HR from another global food company, called me and said, "What are you doing in Indonesia, Mexico, and everywhere? It's a shame." I said, "Well, what we are doing?" He told me, "Because you are doing the reverse social dumping. By improving social condition, you are disturbing the game." I said, "You should be happy because we are increasing our labor cost." He said, "Not at all. All our employees want to leave our company. We are facing a big problem. And now the people are so happy to join that company. We see your performance increasing and we are losing our resources." And I said, "Just join the club. it will be fair competition again.
Yes.
It's interesting to see you can do the race to the bottom, or yeah, you can do the race for the top.
Yes, and one of the things that's happening is
either economic, either social.
the faith in the whole
social
thing.
climate and economy go together on the long term. And our job, we are in governments, in international organizations, in parliaments and companies, is to find the way to, and the methodology and the steps to go from A to B. But with this long-term view, I think the interest is the common interest.
Yes, and of course, one of the things that everybody has to really be concerned about is the trustworthiness of the data. And one of the questions that's come in is how do you actually build faith? And I think it's a question directly for you, Paulina, was aimed at you. You know, how do you actually build faith? What do we do to mitigate the risks around the ratings agencies and so on? How do we build trust that the ratings agencies are up to the task?
I think the way is who is building the rating. It has to be a stakeholder approach.
Mm-hmm. Great.
When we measure something at ILO, I mean, employers, workers, and government work together. You can imagine how much debates there are to agree. When we did, after 4 months of discussion with social partners, the equality index for France, and also with the parliaments, we had ton of hours of discussion, but at the end, it's a common tool that we choose. So I think it's very important that the question of the measurements, the rating, the index, which are so important, are built also with the stakeholders. Then everyone can embrace the result.
And Paulina, what would be your take on that question?
Thank you. Actually, I'd like to build on that. So absolutely. So when we build our methodology, we go through a rigorous consultation process, and we try to involve the companies themselves and then the users of the benchmark, so the investors, but also the voices of the people who may not always be reflected then in the conversations within the boardroom or within the company. So when we were building our just transition methodologies, we were trying to speak to indigenous communities, peoples, and the workers who would be affected by the transition to a low carbon environment, whose voices need to be involved in when we build the methodology, because they're the ones who then will feel what that company is doing. They're the ones impacted. So it really is that stakeholder dialogue, and including not just an institutional conversation around it, but also really looking at the community impact of where that company has the business. And then it's also, that's a societal bit, but it's also very important that we build on agreed global targets. And so we have the SDGs as a guide. There are many, many targets that sit under the SDGs. Now, they are a government agenda, but they can be transposed to a business agenda. The Paris Agreement has also been set, that's agreed globally. And then we have other targets like the scientific-based targets.
And they're all sort of rolling up to the same agenda these days, aren't they? Yeah. Is how one's looking at it. And Michael, Michelle, you seem to have a point that you were bringing in here.
Well, in fact, I know we don't have a lot of time.
No, we don't. I'm coming back to you in 1 minute. So just 1 minute, and then I'd like to...
No, I just wanted to add to what was said, that sometimes at the board we miss things. I'll give you one example. 15 years ago, so I was member of the board of a pharma company in the US, and we were a group of business people at the board doing our job the best we could, pushing for more innovation, for more revenues, for more cash flow, for a better pipeline, etc. And we thought we were doing fine. I had to leave the board when I moved back from America to France. And a few years later, a crisis appeared, which is the famous opioid crisis, where companies that were pharmaceutical companies that were selling opioids, in fact, sold too much of them. And that created, as you know, a major health crisis in the US.
Yes.
So I reflected upon that, wondering, how did we miss that? We had our board discussions, we discussed things, and we never thought, hey, Are we sure that the product we are selling is not being used too much? Are we sure that we're not pushing too much our commercial teams, our medical teams, etc., etc.? So I'm using that as an example that sometimes good, honest people can totally miss a major issue that appears later on.
Which is why Paulina's point is so important. Get to hear people, get the questions from them early in so that you can see the whole rounded picture. And as you said, we are short of time. So I would love to just throw you one last question each. And I know I'm only allowing you a minute or so for the answer. But if we're trying to get businesses to act as positive agents for change on these big societal issues, what would be your one ask for business? Muriel, can I throw it to you first? From where you sit, what would be the one ask you would have for business to get on board to help solve societal challenges?
I would say to businesses 2 words. First, walk the talk on social performance. Don't go to social washing. We have no time for that. Do it for real. And the second is clearly there. And you will be surprised by the result. Because when you invest on gender equality, you get fantastic teams. When you get on purpose business driven, you get engagement, more engagement. It means more performance. So just there, people in companies are your allies, not your enemies. It's not just bees, they are people.
Yeah.
So build it with them.
Wonderful. So actually walk the talk on this question and do it inside the company with the people coming with you would be what you would like businesses to act on. And how would you respond, Paulina, to this question?
Don't work in isolation. This is a comprehensive agenda for all of us. The metrics are there, the data is coming together, and companies can be agents of change, but not if they try to do it in isolation. And so the dialogue between different actors, be it labour unions or business platforms or investors, civil society organisations, governments critically, and the companies is the only way that we're going to be all aligned to the task that we have, which is to get the SDGs implemented and Paris Agreement too. So don't act in isolation would be my one key message.
Fantastically clear. And Camille, how would I turn to you on this subject?
I am fully aligned with what Muriel just said. Listen to your teams. When I joined Before IG 1 year ago, before joining, I asked the question, are you sincere? Are you sincere in your convictions, etc.? And I started to work with companies, with teams who are absolutely sincere, and young, old people, they want to change the ways they do business. It's striking and it's exciting. And so I would say that the strength is within companies. Of course, consumers, investors, etc., put the pressure on businesses, but we can move forward, and we will do. I'm very optimistic because I can see every day within this coalition that companies' teams want to drive change and scale up.
Very, very clear once again. And the passion of the power of people inside the business is what Muriel was referring to. And I think we introduced you as the villain of the piece. Maybe we were a bit harsh, Michelle, when we began that way. But if you were going to answer the question, what would we ask of business? What's your answer?
Allow me to answer slightly beside the question. And suggest 6 C's, the letter C. 1, communicate relentlessly. You will never communicate too much. 2, focus on the customers. Listen to the customers. Of course, listen to the team, but listen to the customers. They always have something interesting to say. 3, watch competition, either to do things better or to do things the same way if you can observe something that is a smart way to do things. 4, calculate. Speeches and words are not enough. Measure. You only manage what you measure. 5, allocate your capital the right way, which means invest more here and less here. And 6, show courage. All these things, it's nice to be together, but in real life, it often takes a lot of courage to fight resistance, to convince people, and to make the hard decisions.
What convinced you to start on this journey?
The honest answer is 2 things. My father was a pioneer 40 years ago in this field, and so I followed his example. And 2, our customers made it clear that we had no choice.
Very good. We're out of time, and what a wonderful panel, and what clear messages to take away, whether you're in business or encouraging business from the sidelines. Thank you, everybody.